Let's look at changing the opacity or the transparency of an element. From your start files, open 4-13, and we're going to open the index.html page. Right now, it is just an empty document. So let's add some things to that document. First, we are going to add in the body a div with an ID associated with content. And inside that div, we'll have an H1 that says Fall Nature Hikes. Let's add a title of Fall Nature Hikes. And we want to add some CSS. So where am I going to put my CSS? If you said the head section, you are correct. What tags do I need for that CSS first? If you said style tags, you are correct. So in between a set of style tags, let's configure that ID. ID start with hashtags. So hashtag content. And through the magic of technology, all of this will be typed in seconds. Okay, pause my video to add these CSS rules to your content selector. We have background image URL fall.jpg, a background repeat of no repeat, which keeps that image from repeating itself. The margin left and margin right auto, which centers the content in the browser window, and a width and a height, and some padding. Okay, let's take a look at what that looks like in the browser. And boom, it looks pretty ugly, right? So you always want to be aware of one of the principles of design, which is contrast. If you have an image like this that contains both light, so you see these really light colors here of the sky, and then down here with the gray, and then we also have dark colors, like these trees are almost black. There is no font that is going to look good on top of this image, okay? So our black is blending in with that black area. If we changed it to white, but it was in these areas where we have a lighter color, it would be hard to read. So we're going to use opacity to add some contrast. Let's configure in our style section an H1 selector. Okay, in your H1, add the background color of white. We changed the font size to 4M to make it larger and added a padding of 10 pixels to kind of center it vertically, have some extra space around it. Okay, so how can we do opacity? Opacity has its own property called opacity. It is a value of 0 to 1. So let's try 0.6 first, 0.6, and see what that looks like. So we can refresh, nice and opaque. Let's see what happens if we do 0.3, refresh. Oh, much be. So the closer you get to 0, the more transparent it is. See, it's almost transparent at 0.1. But what if we had 0.9? The higher to 1, the more opaque. Okay? So you can tinker with that if you want, but change it back to 0.6 before you finish. Okay, we're going to use basically the same content, but do this a little differently. So let's do a file save as, because we are going to save this in a new folder. So do file save as, and you navigate to where you your shared folder, and this time we're going to save this in HP 4-14. If it asks to overwrite that index file in there, do click replace. That's just saving us from adding this again and adding this again, okay? But we are going to delete our opacity value. Okay, we can use rgba to change the opacity as well. rgba we could actually use for color period. For instance, if we wanted to change background color using rgba, well, we really don't need an A for this. The A is for alpha, and that is your transparency. Okay, so 255, 255. Oh, do you remember 256 is the highest binary numbers? Sounds. So if you do a value of 255, 255, 255, that gives you white. If you would do 0, 0, 0, that gives you black. Okay, we can see in our little editor there. I'm going to undo that and leave that white. So you could use RGB values instead of the hexadecimal code. And in fact, a lot of web designers use RGB instead of hexadecimal. Just a personal preference. But I like hexadecimal because it's less typing, less parentheses, less commas. Okay, so in the H1, let's add an well, let's do color rgba. So this is going to change the color of our text to a more transparent color. Okay, now if I didn't tell you, RGB stands for red, green, blue. So the red value is a value from 0 to 255, and that's here. The green value is a value from 0 to 255. I've got to remove this app. I installed an extension that lets you pick a color from a color picker, and it's not letting me teach correctly. The middle value is the green value from 0 to 255, and this value, that last value, is a blue value from 0 to 55. These actually correspond with your hexadecimal values. So 255 in hexadecimal is FF. 255 FF, 255 FF. Just like if we had a 0 there for black, a 0 there for black, and a 0 there for black, that would be hexadecimal 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0. Okay, so these do correspond with each other, just kind of in a way that may not seem that intuitive. Okay, for our text color for this H1, this RGBA value, we are going to do 255, 255, 255, and 0.7. I told you wrong. It did. No, it didn't. Okay. I'm trying to get out of here early today. I'm just tired of work, and I'm just messing this video all up. Okay. Now, see, we have a transparency value for our text. So we can use that RGBA value, not only, like the opacity only lets us apply transparency to an element, but this RGB value will let us apply it to whatever we can give a color to, like a background color or a text color. Now, it happens to be that RGB is not the only color format. In addition to hexadecimal, which is the hashtag and 6 characters, and we have RGB, which is RGB, and then 3 sets of values. There is also hue, saturation, lightness, and alpha. And lots of web designers use this that are really familiar with graphic design because they can pick colors without even needing to look at a color picker. Now, I still need to use a color picker of some type. I can't just tell you the values except for maybe black and white off the top of my head. But lots of web designers use that hue, saturation, and lightness. And once you get familiar with that, you just know from the percent values of each what color you're making. Okay, so this time, let's change our color to hsla, hue, saturation, lightness, and alpha. And in parentheses, we need to give each one of those values. So the hue, let's say, is 60. The saturation, we'll say, is 100%. The lightness, we'll say, is 90%. And then in this case, let's make the alpha 0.8, okay? And let's see how that changes. It's really not going to change anything. It's almost exactly the same as it was before. But that is another way to continue that transparency, to do it with hue, saturation, lightness, and alpha. If you want more information on hue, saturation, lightness, or alpha, or the RGB values, again, those are completely valid ways of using color in HTML and CSS. Go to W3C schools and take a look around. For instance, they're showing you the difference between these green colors green, light green, dark green, and pastel green, just by changing, they didn't change the core number, the hue, they just changed the saturation and the lightness. So you can play around with that in this area if you want to see the differences that these values make and have in your code. So it's especially when you're working with a monochromatic theme. Monochromatic means you use different shades of one color. You can really make a good color theme. We'll talk more about using colors and good graphic design in chapter 5.